I brought a bunch of my show fans, 72 of them, to Cat Hoax thing on my 40th birthday 3 years ago. And it was great. It was really interesting. The people loved it. I mean, not just the inmates, but the people I brought, of course, loved it. But when I went to the prison, we were talking about business ideas, among other things. We were talking about business ideas.
Where'd you go, to San Quentin?
I went to High Desert.
Oh, High Desert. Okay.
And that was one of them, and I went to a different one the next time, but I can't remember. And so at High Desert, we were talking about business ideas, and these guys would go, all right, well, this is probably a dumb idea, but I grew up in an area with a lot of junk, and this is just one of the many good ideas that these guys had. He goes, it's probably a bad idea. I grew up in a neighborhood that was junk everywhere, so what I would do is I would get trucks, and I would give them to a bunch of guys who don't mind doing a little bit of work. We would go and haul in the junk, and we'd either dispose of it, or a lot of it was metal. We'd recycle it, and we'd take that money, and I go, not only is that not a bad idea, my friend owns the company 1-800-GOT-JUNK, which is, I think, worth like $500 to $800 million. This is a very good idea. A very multinational company is doing, and he was both excited and disappointed. One, disappointed that somebody had his idea, but two, very excited that he had a good idea. And I said, but you're not totally out of luck here, because it's a franchise, which means when you get out, you can buy your own truck/franchise, and I'm sure that Brian, who founded the company, would love to work with people who are, rebuilding their lives and are not afraid of lifting an old rusty ass stove and throwing it in the back of a truck, because that's the gig, and so it was really interesting, because you just see, I saw prison in my eyes go from a place where a bunch of tragic souls who've made bad choices go to sort of languish to it's a battery of unused and largely wasted human potential that's waiting to be tapped. There's so many smart guys in prison. There's so many good guys that started selling drugs when they were 11 and went to prison when they were 16, and now they're 35. They're not the same people that they were when they went in. And it was really eye-opening for me to see that. Your story, or I should say the story, as far as it is relevant to this show, because I hate saying your story because you have a life outside of all of this, and you did before. But the story starts with essentially selling cocaine in Seattle, the Miami to Seattle pipeline. This is what got you in trouble, obviously. This is not the beginning of your life as a regular guy. But tell me a little bit about this, because I think the first thing, unfortunately, when people hear that somebody's been to prison is, what did you do?
Yeah, well, sure, I sold cocaine, and they charged me with that, and that's. But the reality is I'm a kid who didn't pay attention to his parents, and they tried to put me on. My father immigrated from Cuba, really to build a better life here, and really I had every opportunity to build a better life. But I just started I was always drawn to a faster life when I was a kid, and despite the best efforts of parents to try and discipline me, I made bad decisions, and by the time I was 20, I saw that movie Scarface, and it just spoke to me. I think because the guy played a Cuban and he sounded like my dad.
Yeah.
And I went to see the movie, and then I just started calling, because he had escaped with some other guys, and these guys grew up in Miami. So their children grew up in Miami, so I knew them, and I called him. His name was Tony. I said, Tony, you grew up in Miami. You must know somebody who sells cocaine, don't you? And he said, yeah. I said, well, could you tell me the price? And that's kind of my market research, the wisdom of a 20-year-old.
Wow.
And then I knew kids in Seattle that were my age from kind of the fast life that used cocaine. I didn't use it, but I knew people who did. I said, well, if you use cocaine, you must buy it. Do you know somebody who buys it in quantity? What's the price? And just that little simple market research just showed me there was a huge spread. And then I've not knowing the criminal justice system very well, really not knowing anything about it, I figured, well, if I don't touch it and if I don't hold it, I'm really not breaking the law. And so I started hiring people and saying, hey, I'll pay you to go to Miami. You pick it up, you drive it, you store it, you deliver it. And of course, all that was doing was getting me into a much deeper problem. I just didn't understand that until after I was convicted, really. So I made bad decisions, and then I exacerbated those decisions by not taking responsibility when authorities caught me.
Right, because it sounds like you thought of yourself as an entrepreneur, or more of an entrepreneur as opposed to a drug dealer, because you weren't touching the drugs, which honestly, as a 20-year-old kid, if I'm honest with myself, I can kind of follow that logic.
There's not nothing to be proud of in that backstory, right? I mean, didn't pay attention to family, didn't pay attention in school, didn't pay attention to teachers, had every opportunity to become better. I met a lot of people that didn't have those opportunities, of course, while I was in prison. I was not one of them. I just made really bad decisions, and I think it's a reflection of bad character for this particular 20-year-old.
Sure. I'm not making excuses for this, but I'm just trying to sort of say, like, hey, when you're 20 and you think, but I'm not touching the drugs. Yes, if you're smart enough to stop and think about it, you do realize you must be doing something wrong. But I could also understand not quite understanding how bad this really was, especially with the war on drugs going on.
Well, it's not going on yet. See, right? This is Ronald Reagan's in the White House. So this is like the start of it. So it's not mainstream. That doesn't really happen until I'm already deep involved in it. So when I'm starting, right, cocaine doesn't have that. There's no crack yet. Right. So you don't know about gangs, and I saw Scarface, and it seemed kind of glamorous to me as I said, the wisdom of a 20-year-old. And I just really went off as my judge said at sentencing, you didn't walk down the wrong road, you ran down the wrong road. And he was right, and so, yeah, I certainly saw it that way. I wanted to delude myself into believing, these are consenting adults. They, if I could buy shoes for 20 grand and sell it for 50 grand, I'd do that. But, I made really bad decisions.
Yeah. I assume then, did you get hit with the kingpin statutes and stuff like that? Yeah.
Yeah. That's the actual crime, was the Title 18. I think it's Title 18, it might be Title 21, USC 848, which is continuing criminal enterprise. And that has three elements to it. You've got to have manage or control 5 or more people, which is, somebody drives a car, somebody buys an airplane ticket. That's it. So 5 or more people, certainly check. They could prove that. At least 3 or more overt acts, check. Did somebody fly to Miami? Did somebody drive it? Did somebody deliver it? 3 or more acts, check. And then the third is substantial amounts of money. And that's in the eyes of, the beholder. So 10 grand could be that. And certainly my crime involved a lot more than that. So check. So I'm certainly should have known, but my whole mindset at that time was listening to an attorney who told me that with the right amount of money I could win, not, hey, what can I do to make amends? And that mindset made it much more difficult.
Sure. So you end up facing life even though you never touched the drugs, which is really like, when I read that in the book, I just thought like, man, life is a long damn time for something like this. But
well, I'll clarify the record there as far as never touching the drugs. I mean, certainly I'm around. I coordinated in a way to minimize my exposure to everything. I hired people, I put them in, and I tried to separate myself. But I'm guilty of what they charged me with.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I just wasn't a substance abuser.
Right. It's the story of you getting arrested and getting convicted is harsh, is hard to read, really. But then the idea, the disappointment of your family, like your parents, your grandparents, your wife, that was hard to read. I wonder if that felt even worse than the conviction itself in the moment.
Well, it was the lies, right, that I'd lived during the entire time. I wasn't willing to admit what I had done, and because I believed I pursued a strategy and I had to go all in. And that strategy was to deny that I had anything to do with it, which really exacerbated my problems. But that was the real pressure, as I'm sitting here looking at my family, my father and my mother, who are just torn apart, broken apart, humiliated. My sister's humiliated. And knowing I did all this, and you're locked in, in the hole, or, in a custody, in a detention center. And they just wanted to love me, and I couldn't even have the decency to say I was wrong. That didn't happen until after I was convicted. And that was kind of my wake up moment.
So you end up with 45 years. How old were you at that time?
23. I got arrested when I was 20. So I started when I was 20, got arrested when I was 23, convicted and sentenced, and started the journey that was in for 9,500 days.
Could you even wrap your head around 45 years at that time? Because that's more than twice your age, really, at that point.
The problem was I didn't understand the complexities of the criminal justice system. I didn't understand We tend to see ourselves one way and we think the world sees us the same way. And I did not see myself as a criminal, despite the reality that I broke the law every day from the time I was 20 till the time I was 23 by presiding over an enterprise that distributed cocaine across the country. I convinced myself there's no weapons, there's no drugs. There's no violence. It's consenting adults. I wanted to delude myself that says, who's going to see me as a criminal? And then I really made it difficult when I went to trial and I took the witness stand and lied. You put your hand on the Bible, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, so help you God. And then everything I said was a lie. That was a very bad strategy. And it wasn't until I was convicted of that crime, facing life, that's when I had my epiphany. And I realized that I'd gone down a really bad track and it's time to make amends and reconcile. And that made all the difference in my life.
So you decide to focus on using prison to become a better man, essentially. And you say in the book, living in the penitentiary, but not living of the penitentiary. Can you tell us what that means?
Well, I think I can tell you what it means is that, I can't change the fact that I'm in here, but I don't want to be a part of this. I hate prison. I hate the culture of prison. I don't like being a criminal. And I would love to say I figured this out on my own, but the reality, like every other, I think, person, we learn from leaders, people that are smarter than us and stronger than us. And I learned from Nelson Mandela and Viktor Frankl and Malcolm X, and these people helped me craft a strategy. It started with Socrates during that awkward stage of conviction before sentencing. And it was there that I just had a complete mind shift that has governed my life from that moment.
There's so much in the book that really, you do a great job of building up like where you're heading, and then you hit a wall and you get knocked down a peg, and you build up again, you get knocked down a peg. Like one anecdote here is you find out that your marriage is over because you call one day and this dude answers the phone and is like, yeah, I'm your wife's boyfriend. You probably shouldn't call back. And it's just like, you just keep getting kicked while you're in there. And it's so, I don't know how you file an appeal and it doesn't work. Like, at what point do you lose hope? Because I feel like I might have lost hope at many points in your story.
And if I wasn't inspired by Socrates, maybe I would have. But the reality, I think, is this is life, right? Life is filled with obstacles and struggles, and maybe they're not of the complexity that I had of my own making, but at any given day, something's happening. There are people in America right now getting fired, dealing with the market crashing, dealing with obesity, dealing with divorce. Life happens. And the story, what I hope people see is that this is a human story. It's really not about prison. It's about life and the complexities of life. And more importantly, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to become better? How do we live a life of contribution and meaning and relevance and dignity, even when bad stuff happens? And certainly it happened to me. I learned how to look at it differently, from a different lens.
So tell me a little bit about your mindset on prison and what you were determined to do, right? The whole not living of the penitentiary. Because you say, look, I'm not going to come out the same person I was when I went in.
And that started really early, right? It started during the time that I was convicted to the time that I was sentenced. That's when an officer passed me a book about philosophy. And I didn't know how to spell philosophy. I didn't know what it meant. But I wanted to find wisdom, and that helped me stop thinking. When I read the story of Socrates, it really helped stop thinking about where am I and what can I do? It helped me start thinking about people like you and your audience as, with a really simple yes or no. Is there anything I can do when I'm in here that will cause the world to see me not for the bad decisions that I made when I was 20, but rather how I responded to those decisions? And that type of Socratic questioning leads to say, well, yes, then what is it? And then you've got to start answering that. And so my whole strategy was, let me find a 3-pronged plan that's going to help me. And one of them was, what would you want? Not what I want. What would you want? Or the people I want to meet, what would they want? Well, they would want me, one, to focus on getting an education, because you can't fake that. If you focus on education, it shows you don't want to be a criminal. And 2, how can I contribute to society in some kind of meaningful, measurable way? And then 3, how can I build a support network? If I can find that path, I can restore confidence and feel as though I'm not just waiting for calendar pages to turn, but I'm really that living that message of, say, the self-made man, where you're kind of carving yourself out of a block of stone and figuring out, what am I going to become, rather than what did I do? And that helped.
I know you're big on education. You enrolled in college via correspondence, not something I really knew you could do. I mean, I've heard of correspondence courses, but I thought they were kind of like a 1970s, 1980s thing. I didn't know they still even existed, actually.
Well, remember, I'm pre-internet. So this is,
Right.
I went to prison before there wasn't such a thing as a audio video, because this is the thing that you might see on the Jetsons, but it was not something you could comprehend. So there were correspondence courses back then. And there still are some limited ones for people in prison that do not have access to the internet. So I was just writing, to anybody, just trying to find. I made simple letter. I made really bad decisions. I'm in prison. I want to become better. I want to go to school. Or does that opportunity exist? And you send. Send a letter out, probably not going to get a response. I like to say, you send 10 letters out, you've got a 10 times better chance of not getting a response. But if you send 100 letters out, you hear. And I was really fortunate to find a university, and that really changed my life.
Is that how you resist the mindset of hopelessness in prison? Because you wanted to learn, but in the book, it seems like a lot of other guys were just convinced they're going to go back to crime after they get out, and they say, hey, I know you're learning now, but you're just going to go back to your old ways the second you get out of here. And even in the classes that were in prison, you talk about a lot of these guys being really intelligent, and then they get out of class, they drop their vocabulary, and they act like idiots to kind of blend in with everyone else. It's like social pressure, but it's the worst kind of peer pressure almost.
There is a mantra in every jail and prison that I'm really passionate about changing, and it's that the best way to serve time is to forget about the world outside and just focus on your reputation in prison. And that's a recipe that leads to what we have, the greatest social injustice of our time, with mass incarceration and intergenerational cycles of recidivism. And I try to change that, but it is really sad that at the time that I was in prison, anybody could have done the same path. They could have went and gotten an education, but I was the only person in the penitentiary that graduated, that really stuck through it, because the system, the irony is that we call it a system of corrections, but the longer we expose people to corrections, the less likely they are to succeed or to function or to prepare. People learn how to live in prison, and those skills are fundamentally different from what it takes to succeed in society. So I'm always striving to change that. That started, though, really because I learned from guys like Mandela and Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just by reading their work. It's really incredible. You'd think, okay, we know that prisoners get books and things like that, but getting mentors is brilliant. And unfortunately, you're dealing with prison bureaucracy, right? So it's very difficult, and you really illustrate this well in the book, that it's hard to get mentors, because even if a college professor is like, I see potential in you, you're a really smart guy, let me help you, the prison authorities, they have all the power in the world to deny requests for basically what seems like no good reason. I mean, they always say it's for the security of the institution, but you see, and a lot of your anecdotes are, they won't let me have my textbooks because they don't want outside stuff coming in, which, okay, I get that, but like, I don't know, flip through the book. All you have to do is flip through the book once and realize it's not hollowed out and there's not something in there. And now this guy can take his political science class or whatever, economics class. And it's just so clearly designed to almost mess with you. Like, you have these petty tyrants who just go, I'm going to say no because I can.
So I want to write that this book is going over a cross section of multiple decades, right? So we're just talking about what's going on during this era of the buildup of prisons. I would like to say I'm really optimistic that things are getting better. And it is I mean, I was in a prison earlier this week speaking, and I speak with wardens, and I speak with the directors now, and the fact that they're bringing me into prison, the fact that people that used to lock me in the hole and block me are now bringing me in to try and change lives of people in prison gives me a tremendous amount of hope, because it's showing there's a change, and that's both legislatively, and also just by personal leadership within the institutions. I'm very optimistic that we're going to see things better. I just have a different timeline than a lot of people, because I already have gone through a quarter century, and I have to help people inside see hey, the hope, because there is hope. There's a new law called the First Step Act, which really changes things. There's financial resources going into it. There are incentives that did not exist when I was in prison. And so I know that Earning Freedom tells this story of what I went through, because those didn't exist when I was in prison. That is correct, that when I was in prison, the mantra was, we don't care about your life after relief. We only care about the security of the institution. But fortunately, things are changing now, and we're incentivizing people to pursue a better path.
Yeah, and thank goodness for that, because it really, again, I said when I went to do some of my volunteer stuff in prison, or if you can call it that, it really is just such a battery of untapped potential, of human potential, with a lot of people who really want to do they don't just want to go out and start committing crime. They want to start a business, or they want to work. They want to raise a family. These are guys with dreams, and it really is something that I would love to see changed. Tell me about Professor Bruce.
Oh, it's really sad for me that I can't bring him on the show. Bruce was an incredible part of my journey. I was very early in the system, and through somebody I knew in prison, got an introduction to this professor who was from Chicago. I think he was from the University of Illinois in Chicago, and the University of North Carolina. I wrote him an unsolicited letter, like I did to many people, and just said, I'm in prison for a long time. I want to get better. I really like to learn. I'm in college, just trying to grow. And I was just so thrilled when he wrote me back and said, I'd love to help you. I'll come and visit you, see if you can get me on your visiting list. And we succeeded in overcoming those challenges. Then he would come visit me probably 3 or 4 times a year. He would try to, since I couldn't go to the university, he tried to bring it to me by sending me work on art history and music and plays that he was going to. He was an educator, and the only thing he wanted from me was to become an educated man and to find a way to live a life of meaning and relevance. And he was just a huge source of support for me in many ways throughout the journey. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was probably my 14th or 15th year. So he didn't get to see me when I came home. And that really happened with a lot of the people that had such an influence on my journey. They, just so much time passed, they died. I mean, historically, they were, in their 60s or 70s when I met them, and they just had the time to give me and the wisdom to give me, at the time at that particular time, but they didn't have the lifespan. And so they weren't going to be around at 115 or 120, 120 years old. So, but I have a duty to try and live up to all of the trust they placed in me and the help they gave me.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you felt like you needed to prove yourself worthy of his generosity, of not just now, but when he was alive. Because if I'm inside and somebody is taking their time and potentially it's expensive, right? They've got to take a lot of time. They've got to deal with a lot of grief, right? They're dealing with the bureaucracy just like you are, trying to help you out, and they're getting stopped all the time, and it's just a whole thing. It's like it's almost, I won't say it's thankless because you're thanking them, but I don't know how many other people are making it easy on them.
Did you remember in the story where I had to architect that transition, that transfer from the high security penitentiary to a medium security prison?
Yeah.
And we published this article together. Bruce was that kind of guy where, for your readers who haven't read the book, I'm in a high security pen. It's getting more and more violent. It's time to go. But you're a cog in the bureaucracy. And so you've got to figure out, you got to have the critical thinking skills, say, okay, how am I going to overcome the complications of just making a request? Bruce just was so willing to any suggestion I offered. And we agreed to publish an article in a peer-reviewed journal that would help us influence the agency. And he would then travel to prison to prison to prison. I'm just really have so many fond memories of his mentorship.
I heard you made your first $1 million behind bars. Now, how does that work? Because, first of all, how do you make money in prison? A lot of us are trying to make our first $1 million here on the outside, fam.
So this happens. I was lucky. I'll take luck over skill every time.
Okay. Every time?
Yeah, luck is is magnificent.
It's kind of
I feel
priceless,
lucky to
isn't
be.
it?
I feel lucky to be talking to you. Okay, so yes, I definitely live in gratitude, and that's not just a cliche for me. So I was in prison, perhaps in my 10th year, and you read about Gary. I don't know if I called him Gary in the book. I don't recall, but Gary is his real name. And Gary came to me and he said, I want you to read my case. I think my lawyers are ripping me off, and I'd been in jail already for probably 12 years, I think, at that time. And he said, and I was in law school at that time. I'd already gotten my undergrad, I'd gotten my master's, and I started this law program at my first two universities were great. The law school was like a diploma mill. But I'm going through it, and he could see that I was really a serious guy, and I didn't communicate with him. And he just came to me and said, would you read my brief? I said, Gary, I don't do that. And then he says to me, money's no object. And this shows the wisdom of being in prison for 12 years. Somebody tells you money's no object. And I told him, I said, look, I don't have time to read your brief. I don't do that. But I said, if you want me to read it, I'm going to charge you $2,000. And all I'm going to do is read it and then tell you what I think of it. That's all. And he said, okay, where do you wire the money? I didn't know what that even meant.
Yeah, wire it. I'm used to dealing with cash and briefcases, man. You're going to have to explain that one.
So he tells me, I said, look, here's the deal. Here's my sister's address. Send her $2,000. If she sends the check, then we'll talk. If you don't send the check, it probably means you've thought better about it, and it's probably the right decision. But we'll go from there. And great. So one day I call home and my sister says, do you know anybody in New York? And I said, I'm in New Jersey. I know 500 people here from New York. Why? And she said, I got this check for $2,000. I have no idea what it's from, but it's from New York. So I figure it's something you're doing. And I was over the phone, the prison phone. I said, holy crap, he gave you the money. And she said, what do you want me to do? This is like 1997, 98. And I'm reading about the internet. I've been reading about the internet, and but it's like reading about playing tennis. It doesn't make you a tennis player. I couldn't get my hands on it, but I really believed what I was reading. And I said, I really want to invest in this internet, and I want you to open a brokerage account for me. This is how I made the money. She says, well, how do I do that? I said, there's a company, I think it's called E-Trade, and you could open this account online and put $2,000, and with $2,000, I can open a margin account. And so we do it all over the phone. And she says, she said, well, what do I do? I said, there's a company, it's called Yahoo. And she says, what's a Yahoo?
Yeah.
I said, it's YHOO, and it's got an exclamation point, but just look it up and see if we can buy the shares. And so she does. And she says, I have $2,000. I think it was trading like $60 a share pre any splits. And I said, okay, I want you to buy $3,000 worth. And she said, but you only have two. I said, no, you can borrow against what the equity. And she did it. And then as soon as she hung up, she says, wow, you've already made like $300. It's worth that much.
Yeah.
And I said, this is awesome. And I said, and every time it goes up, I get more buying power. Let's leverage that. And so then I go see Gary and I said, dude, I read your case. I don't think that you should be advancing on this deal with your attorneys. They're just trying to charge you a lot of money for nothing. And you're going to get out in like 9 more months. And your attorneys are asking for $250,000 to file this brief. But you've got risk if you file this brief, because you're getting out in 9 months right now. You are getting deported. You're from Russia. That's a fact. I said, if you file this brief, first of all, it's going to take longer than 9 months for you to get before a court again. And you'll be in Russia. Okay. Second, if you file this brief and you prevail, just hypothetically, the court's free and open, the law's changed, and now they can consider relevant conduct that you weren't convicted of. And there's a possibility you get more time than you have right now. And that's a real risk for you, because I'd read all of his case. And I said, why take the risk? It's 9 months. And he goes to me, how can you do this? How can you do 9 months in here? I mean, I don't know how you've been in prison for 10, 12 years and you're always doing this. I said, dude, I got a plan. That's why. And by then I'd known that he was really successful because I'd read all of his stuff. He said, what do you mean you have a plan? I said, I'm going to get a law degree. I'm going to learn about the system, not because I want to be a lawyer, but I know that I can build something. I'll earn like $10,000 a year and I'll put it in the market. I got 15 years to go. I'll have $150 invested well. I said, I'll probably walk out with like $300,000. I could start my life. And he said, 300 grand, that's not enough to start your life. I said, well, it is for me. And I said, that 2 grand you gave me, I've already turned it into 6. And he said, what do you mean you turn it? And this has been like a month. He said, what do you mean it's 6? I said, yeah, I bought $3,000 worth of stock. It's since doubled, it's split, and it's on the rise again. And it's amazing. He said, that's the stock market. I said, I've read about the stock. I don't know anything about the stock. Could you teach me everything? I said, well, I've been reading about it for 10 years, but I'm happy to show you what I want. He said, I don't want to do it with $2,000. Let's put some real money into it and make it happen. And I said, Gary, I said, the thing is, I was willing to take that high beta stock play with 2 grand. I said, if you want to put real money into it, I mean, that's life-changing for me. It's nothing for you. And he said, look, I need to get through these 9 months. And if this will help me, it's worth it to me. He said, here's the one condition I make. I'm going to send you, and I think it was 100 grand. I'm going to send you 100 grand. We're going to invest it, but you can't start buying, mutual funds and conservative blue chips. I said, you need to be aggressive.
He wants to gamble.
Yeah. He said, you've seen I make, 50,000, 100,000 while I'm sleeping. He said, this is going to help me get through there. And he said, and here's the promise I'll make you. He said, if you lose it all, I'll make sure that you have 50 grand before I leave. And that's the deal. And so, it was like that's luck, right? How do you find that kind of guy inside of a federal prison? And I would argue that you sow those seeds very early so that guys like that believe in you, because if it happened once, it was luck, but it happened many times, as I would describe in the journey. And that's how I started. So I was really lucky to be buying Yahoo, building big positions in Yahoo and America Online in the late 1990s. And those stocks were, the equivalent of, Tesla, or crypto when crypto was $20, they just skyrocketed. And, and I kept leveraging it, and, got to a peak of 2.1, I think, in equities with like $1 million plus in equity, because I had a lot of margin debt, but what goes up, what comes down. And,
what goes up must come down. Exactly. I was going to say,
but it changed my life. That making that money changed my life. It allowed me to get married to the love of my life in prison and support her and put her through nursing school and rebuild my career. And I'm really grateful.
Yeah, I want to clarify that you got married and put your wife through nursing school while you were inside prison. So you were providing and supporting your wife as good or better than many guys outside, and you were doing it all while not having the ability to just go use the phone for however long you want, not having the ability to go clock in at a regular job, not having the ability to use the internet, being kind of hobbled at every turn in many ways. Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. Well, are you even allowed to make money in prison? I'm not sure why, but it sounds like it might be against the rules. I mean, you can't even get your frickin' philosophy textbooks. They don't mind that you're margin trading on E-Trade?
So, let's walk that through. So there's just 2 questions, rules and laws, right? Are you allowed? Well, the law does not prohibit anybody from making money in prison. The rules do. And I didn't break the rules. So how did this happen? So before we opened the account, when I got the 2 grand, I went to the captain of the prison and I told him, I want to ask you, is it okay if I open a brokerage account? Because initially I wanted to do it myself. And he said, no, you can't do that from prison. I would consider that running a business. And I said, well, look, dude, they stopped me from getting my PhD. I think at that time I had like 18 years to go. I said, I've got to prepare myself for the future. And I have a little cash and I want to do it. And he said, well, open a mutual fund. I said, I know 10 guys on this compound for running mutual funds that broke the law for stealing people's money. I want to run my own ship. He said, you can't do it. He said, give someone power of attorney. I said, so you're saying that if I have my sister do it, I could advise her on what to do? He said, as long as you're not pulling the trigger, you're fine. And so that is what prompted me to tell my sister, open the account. And then she did it. And now it didn't mean I didn't have problems. They would routinely give me shots with discipline infractions, but I always prevailed because I got that in writing, that I could advise her on what to do. And that also happened when I became a published author. So by the time, the market had a great run until the early 2000s, when you had kind of before Web 2.0 came, the market crashed, and I lost out of that million I made. I lost significantly a portion of it. And I walked away with like $100,000, which was supposed to be set aside to help me get out of prison. And that was, phenomenal. And then I had to shift my focus, and that's when I shifted to publishing. So when I shifted to publishing, I also made money and had to do it the same way by assigning royalties to somebody else. And that's what I would get a letter from counsel. So I always went through the path to protect myself. It didn't mean that I didn't face complications of going to segregated housing multiple times and being transferred from prisons, but
segregated housing is a euphemism for the hole, by the way, for people who don't know.
Yeah. So the rules of the prison state that you can't run a business, okay? The rules also state you have the authority under the First Amendment to publish without requesting, okay? So I published. Those published writings generated revenues. I got a letter from counsel that said, as long as I don't control those revenues, I'm not even violating the prison rules. So that's how I built my career in prison. I like to say I'm the only guy that came out of prison and had to take a pay cut.
Yeah. Exactly. And no more free lunches, buddy. Actually, speaking of free lunches, you didn't eat free lunch. You didn't go to the chow hall, which I thought was almost a throwaway anecdote in one of the books. But tell me why you avoided the chow hall and bought all of your food from the commissary. It's not because you're a fancy pants gourmet, right? There's a reason behind it.
No. Everything is strategic, right? We've got to, in life, we've got to visualize success as the best possible outcome. And then you have to have a plan. Put priorities in place and tools, tactics, and resources you have to develop, always assessing risk. The problem with prison is that I can control my behavior. I can't control the behavior of other people around me. So I became really strategic in what time I would go to bed, what time I would wake up, the people with whom I would associate, where I would put myself in the channels, because I can't eliminate the volatility of prison, but I can minimize my exposure to it. The chow hall, the television rooms, the table games, the organized sports, all of those have a higher level of risk because there's personalities involved that I can't control. And if I put myself into a position that I don't control, I also put myself into a position that could threaten all the great things that I'm doing. And because I place such a high value on my marriage, on my relationship with mentors, on my preparations for success upon release, I don't need to go to the chow hall. It's worth a few $100s a month that I spend on buying my own food. And you're right, it's not gourmet food. I lived on chicken and mackerel.
I mean, hey, at least you get protein and it's not like instant noodles. I'm thinking of prison commissary food, and I'm just imagining the stuff I ate in college, like those ramen noodle bricks that you put in boiling water. A lot of people do
eat those things. Yeah. There are those, okay? But I was a big fan of Starkist or chicken of the sea, or mackerel and fish bait, basically. But, I developed a taste for it. It's kind of strange. There's some funny stories about, serving so much time in prison and how it influences every aspect of your life.
Do you have any sort of weird prison quirks that you still have? Like, I have to sleep with the light on, or I still eat the crappy low-grade mackerel because I have a taste for it. Is there anything like that?
No, definitely. I mean, I did, 9,500 days in there. So I don't sleep without earplugs, and I live in a very quiet place, but I that's how I slept in prison. So any place I am, I have my earplugs. I used to sleep with those things, that mask
like
that
an
goes
eye
over
mask?
your eyes.
Yeah.
And my wife, after about a year and a half, she said, that's enough. You got to learn to take that thing off in bed. So I don't do that anymore. Other quirks of prison is that's a reminiscent of prison, I think, I start my day at like 3 a.m, still, because I learned to do that in prison, and I go to bed pretty early. really obsessed with protecting myself because I know who I am. And I know that I was in prison a long time, and I love what I do. I love writing. I love producing. I love being creative, and I love to work to help other people in challenging times get better. So for me, this is my life, and it's very different. If I'm not talking with somebody either about business or about that experience and how do you use it to apply it to your life, I'm really kind of a deadbeat. This is really all I do. So those I don't do small talk just because I didn't learn how to do that in prison.
I can imagine there's either only small talk in prison or no small talk, depending on the interaction that you're in prison.
There's non-structured life in prison. A lot of prison is about trying to deal with the pains of confinement, of being separated from the people you love and the people who love you. And because of the infrastructure of prison, a lot of people revert to sports, watching sports or gambling or table games or anything that can kind of lessen it and just living in prison. My focus always was about where am I going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and what can I do today to advance and move the needle a little closer to the direction where I want to go.
Do you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Because in prison, if you don't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's noisy and you have no privacy.
Yeah. In prison, I learned that there is advantage to sleeping when other people are awake and being awake when other people are asleep. And I didn't have a keyboard, or a computer. So every book I wrote with that wonderful technology called a Bic pen and white paper. And that requires concentration and it requires time and quiet. And so that's how I learned to produce. And it's just a habit that stays with me. I don't use an alarm clock. I just wake up, sometimes 1, 2, 3 in the morning. And it doesn't matter if I'm on the East Coast, West Coast. I mean, yesterday or earlier this week, I was in Missouri, which is Central Time. And I started my day at 3 a.m. Missouri time. So it was 1 o'clock California time.
Sure.
And then I came over here and I was in California, Las Vegas yesterday, and I was starting my day at 2:30 in the morning. And just work. I mean, I've got so much to do, and it's just kind of part of the path that got me through prison, and it has helped me build my career since coming home.
How did you start studying law in prison? Because I assume you're not doing a law degree in prison. Are you just reading about the law and figuring this stuff out?
No. So that's a great question. And so what happened with me, I got my master's and was in a PhD program at the University of Connecticut. And
let me pause there for a second. You got your master's degree and you're in a PhD program. So people who are like, oh man, I just want to highlight how impressive that is. Getting a master's degree, getting an undergrad degree is no joke. Getting a master's degree, I know is hard. Being in a PhD program, I mean, imagine if you weren't locked up. Oh, actually, who knows? You might not have had as much time to pursue this, but still.
So I'd gotten into undergraduate program, had a goal of a timeline to get it done, got it done, wanted to go to law school. And I had Bruce. So Bruce was in Chicago. The ABA was in Chicago, American Bar Association. And he went to try and find what are the accredited law schools. And he gave me a list of all the accredited law schools. I started writing the same letter. I'm in prison. I want to get a law degree. I was a bad student in high school, but I got an undergrad with summa cum laude, and I'm serious. And I don't want to necessarily be a lawyer. I just want to learn about the law. I think it'll help me.
Law school is actually one of the worst places to learn about the law. Take it from me. I went to law school.
I know.
I read that already, huh?
I did read that. I read about your impressive background, and I wrote to all these law schools, and they all wrote me back and said, we can't. The ABA won't allow us to issue a law school by correspondence. But the dean at Hofstra Law wrote me back and said, you can't go to law school, but you can, if you want to get through a probationary period, we have more flexibility in the grad program, and would you like to get a master's degree? And so we structured that. Then I got my master's, and through that, I met all of these mentors who were like the leading penologists in the nation. And one of them was George Cole, who was at the University of Connecticut, and he ran the criminal justice division, and said, yeah, let's do the PhD. It's going to be structured, but we'll figure out a way to get you through it, at least the coursework, until there's the teaching component we'll have to solve later. The warden blocked me after my first year, and that put an end to the PhD, and I needed to do something. And that was what led me to start. I knew that there, although the ABA, an American Bar Association accredited law school, would not allow you to study law through correspondence, but there's the great liberal state of California that does allow you to get a law degree without participating on campus.
Yep.
So I wrote to some of those schools thinking I was going to have the same experience that I had at Hofstra or at Mercer University, where I got my undergrad, paid for it, got all the books, and really worked hard to impress my professors. And I got the paper back without one single mark on it, just an A. And then I knew I was in a diploma mill. This is not a real law school.
Oh,
and,
shoot. Yeah,
but
that's
I'd already
a thing in California.
I'd already paid the tuition. So I went and finished first year. And that's when I met Gary, and then shifted my focus first to the market, which lasted about a couple of years. And then when the market kind of imploded and we went through the dark era of between Web 1.0 and 2.0, I shifted to publishing. And that carried me through the journey. But there are some stories of great stories. Do you know the story of my friend Sean Hopwood?
Why does that sound familiar? That name sounds familiar.
So Sean, my company is Prison Professors. That's my website. It used to be just Prison Professor. Mm-hmm. Sean was a partner of mine. I started as a partner because he was a armed bank robber, and he had a meth problem and so on. So when he was a kid, and while he was in prison, he became a pretty skilled jailhouse lawyer. And to tell you how skilled, he took 2 cases that granted cert at the Supreme Court, and they won.
Wow.
And yeah, it's impressive. He gets out of prison after 10 years. He never got his undergrad in prison, but he just was skilled as a jailhouse lawyer. He gets out during the recession. He goes and finishes an undergrad program. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation kind of learned about him through some awesome advocacy. They gave him a full scholarship to UW Law. He graduates UW Law. His first job is a clerk at the DC Circuit Court, and then Georgetown Law School. He's a tenure track professor at Georgetown Law right now. This is a guy that was an armed bank robber and clerked at the second highest court in the United States, the DC Circuit Court. And so I've got you think a guy in prison can't really learn the law, but
I do not think that. I do not think that. I
don't mean you. I mean the standard thought process might be that, but the reality is a person in prison, as I learned from people, can lead a life of relevance and dignity and be a contributing citizen.
I can almost guarantee you that you are more knowledgeable and useful as a lawyer than I am. I'm not exaggerating.
I'm not a lawyer. Oh,
no,
I
know that. That point still stands. I guarantee that you still, as far as the skills of lawyering, you are still, I guarantee you, better at that stuff than I am, despite my years in practice and having a law degree from Michigan. In fact, I would take that bet. I would take that bet because I'm almost certain that I could not fight a speeding ticket. Your master's degree was from Hofstra, is that correct?
Hofstra, yeah.
So these aren't, I want to highlight this because I don't want people to think like, oh, well, anybody can get a master's degree from Domino's Pizza Correspondence University. These are real schools that are hard to get into, that are challenging, that have real academic standards. I want to highlight that so people don't think like, oh, well, anybody could just mail your money in and get a degree,
I was really fortunate that so many people believed in me, and I really worked hard to prove worthy of that and then to pass it along. And so I'm super grateful now because I get to reach, hundreds of thousands of people in prison. And I'm every day is just a blessing.
How did you meet your wife? Because, not a whole lot of the dating scene in prison. There's a joke in there. I'm not going to go there. How do you? I would imagine.
The truth is, I always had
a
chick in prison. Okay, that's the real truth. Because you need to survive, right? And I did, and I just was the luckiest guy in the world when it was Carol. So I was probably in my 15th. She's looking over there. I want to ask, was it the 15th year?
Yeah.
But I think it was my 15th year.
We can fix it in post.
I think it was my 15th year. I was writing and publishing. And so remember I said I had that 3-pronged goal: educate, contribute, and build a support system. Well, because I was publishing and my books were used, I wrote books that were used in universities across the country. So I'd had students that were studying from either inside, about prison and profiles from prison, to academic textbooks that were used, that my mentors used in school. And a lot of professors used them in school as required reading. So students started to, I guess it would have been called back then, AOLing me, because it wasn't Google.
Yeah, yeah, the little profile.
So they were looking me up and they found that I'd went to Shorecrest High School. And this was 2000. They were getting ready for the 1982 20-year reunion. And Carol is the girl that was kind of coordinating it. I went to school with her in high school, but we were not friends. She was a good girl. I was not a good boy, as we discussed already. And we weren't friends, I wouldn't say. But so when this kid wrote to her and said, is this the same Shorecrest where Michael Santos went? She inquired, why are you asking? And he said that he's in prison, and that prompted her to write me, just saying, hey, we're doing a 20-year reunion, really disappointed that you're in prison and that what you did, I hate drugs. And,
Yikes.
and yeah, kind of started out kind of like she was mad at me. And I wrote her back and I said, I was 20, I'm 35 now. And, I made a lot of bad decisions. You're right. But I've worked hard to try and make amends. And that led to a friendship and a correspondence. And she started to visit me and we fell, crazy in love. And that was more than 20 years ago. And I'm so lucky that she came into my life and she's been the center of my life since then. So yeah, so the money that I earned put her through CNA school, then LVN school, then she became an RN, then she got her master's in nursing, and she worked as a nurse. We were up in your area just as recently as last year. And she was at Stanford, and I just said, well, why don't you just work with me full time? And so now I just feel so grateful because she's runs our operation side.
I know how that is. Yeah, my wife does the same thing in our business.
Yeah, we love working together and we love being together, and my life is just so much richer because she's in it.
How do you manage
that just because she's here?
Yeah, she's next to me. Blink twice if she's next to you, out of frame.
I'm totally telling the truth.
How do you manage a relationship like this with another decade left in your prison sentence? I mean, that is just everybody must be like, come on, man, you've 10 years left, get real.
So it was, that's the way it was. And when it started, she was just so, I would say, she doesn't like it when I say this, but kind of angry at me for selling drugs, even though she didn't know me. And I remember telling her, what are you, a Republican? I've changed my life. I'm just joking with her. And she said, I'm going to get you out of prison. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to launch these advocacy. I said, Carol, time out. I'm not getting out of prison. Okay. Let's just accept and own that. But that doesn't mean we can't have an awesome life. And you could see I'm filled with energy in here, and I'm going to build my life when I come home, and I want you to be a part of it. And if that's what you want to do, that's great. But this is real prison. This is not a game. And she was so committed. She's just amazing. She moved with me 19 times to go from prison town to prison town just so that we could visit every possibility.
In the book, it's really the transfer you, and then she's got to pack up her life and move, and they transfer you again with no warning, and she's got to pack up her life and move.
It interfered with the pursuit that we'd set to go to nursing school because there were different requirements in different states. But we were so just lucky that it happened.
The logistics of managing a relationship, let alone getting married in prison, are just insane. I mean, look,
I was never with her.
Well, yeah, you must be one persuasive dude.
I'm lucky. Lucky, as I told you, luck beats skill every time. I was just lucky.
People must have thought she was just absolutely nuts.
Oh, for sure. She's the prison wife, but then they look at her and she's really pretty and super smart, and I'm just super devoted, and even today I'm just so lucky.
But her family must have been like, what are you doing? I want to shake you. He's in prison.
You don't have that half of it. Her brother's a judge.
Oh, my gosh.
Her brother's a judge. Her dad's a dentist. Her mom's a nurse. So from a totally professional family. But she just went all in. And I'm just really grateful.
Wow. Man, unbelievable. I assume you're on good terms with them now. They probably have come around to you at this point.
I don't think I would say good terms. No, I think that I will always be the guy that stole their daughter or their sister and put her in through this prison term. But, we're really happy, and I am just really lucky. So yeah, I mean, I've reached out and tried, but the judge doesn't really want to have anything to do with me.
That's too bad. That's too bad. And
I've got other judges that do though.
Yeah, I was going to say you have photos with judges on your Instagram.
I've got a lot of judges, other judges that are cool with me, and I'm really grateful.
It's a shame because it also and maybe look, there's probably a lot more to these stories. They're complicated, but it's sort of it's a little bit of a insight into the mindset of somebody who says, well, once a prisoner, always a prisoner. It's like, I don't know if we want that type of person being in charge of rehabilitating people who are trying to change their lives. Hopefully there's more to the story than that.
I don't know what it is, but I'm sure that there is, and that's okay with me. I just always say, Mick Jagger was a great philosopher. He said, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need.
Deep. I want to hear about your cold outreach process because, you're writing all these letters. You mentioned you send like 100. You just really had this mindset of connecting and networking, and you use those contacts, or those contacts helped you get transferred to a more progressive prison, which the words progressive in prison aren't usually something we hear together. But you had kind of a strategy for this, and it was really, really effective.
Incredibly effective. And that particular strategy started with a professor at Princeton who, John DiUlio, was kind of a movement in this whole pathway to mass incarceration. And he published an article in the journal called Let 'Em Rot. And a big editorial page in the back side. And I wrote him a letter, and that was just always my approach. Hey, I'm in prison. I think we can do better. We're an American society. I really believe we need to invest in people, and appreciate your article and the viewpoint you're coming from. But as somebody who's been in prison for 5 years, and I just got my bachelor's, I'm getting my master's, really like to kind of shape your mindset on something better. And that led John to write me a letter, which was incredible because I'm getting this feedback from super influential people that have the president's ear and have the senator's ear, and a professor at Princeton, one of the most prestigious schools. And he became a mentor to me and actually brought a group of students to that progressive prison. And I got to teach a group of Princeton students in the warden's conference room at a federal prison when I was in my 8th year. But that happened like many times in the journey, where Bruce and John and Norval Morris, perhaps the most distinguished penologists in the last 50 years at the University of Chicago, and advocated on my behalf, or Joan Peter Celia at Stanford, who just incredibly influential, invited me to publish with her and open doors. And I mean, all of those people came into my life just through doing what any entrepreneur has to do, right? You have to build trust and make people know like you and trust you, and believe that you can bring value and solve problems. And I was really lucky in that regard. And I always considered that as an obligation of mine to prove worthy and to over-deliver. And it led to me building a professional career. It also led me to become more financially successful when I got out.
You started making these quarterly reports on your progress and sending them out to your support network. And I really think that's smart. That's really a good move because it keeps people invested. It keeps people informed. It gives people who are helping you some kind of intangible return on their efforts. So it was basically a prison development rehab newsletter. It was really smart because I think, if you're helping somebody and you don't know, like, whatever happened to that person, it's a lot. You just don't know. There's nothing there. But if somebody says, by the way, I meant to thank you, here's what I'm doing now, here's where you contributed to that, you just really get people invested in your success. And I think that's part of I would imagine that's one reason why you were so successful inside and outside.
And still doing it. I mean, I'm still reaching out to people, and it's really important to be transparent and open. And in every way, right? You define what success is, and then you document how are you working in incremental steps. And for me, it's really a teaching tool to do that. I create, I think I probably have one, these books, that I send into prisons that I'm showing you how do you do it? What are all the ways that you can document your path? First of all, describe what you're going to be, and then take steps. And one of the greatest exercises that's part of that whole memorializing the journey that I tell people in prison to do is to write book reports, because that's something they do. They're in prison, and I try to get them to think about the stakeholders they're going to meet in the future, whether it's a probation officer, a future employer, somebody else. And I said, I want you to come home with like, if you said you're going to read 200 books in prison, well, tell us what you learned, why you chose the book you chose. Tell us what you learned from reading that particular book, and tell us how that particular book is going to contribute to your success upon release, and document that so that when you come home, people aren't only going to see you as the guy who served a lot of time in prison. They're going to see you as somebody who knows how to face challenges and problems and overcome them. And that strategy worked for me in prison. It works for me today.
It's funny, in the book, there's these anecdotes. You have this prison website, right? Prison Professor, and you end up with like these kind of, I guess I'll say, fans. Well, you'll see some guy and you're like, oh, this really big dude's in the cell with me. What's going on? And then he goes, wait a minute. I read your website. That was really helpful. Thank you so much. It's just really, really funny because what you were doing was clearly so helpful to these people that were going in, and you ended up being, that also unfortunately got you on the radar in a bad way with the prison authorities, right? Because you're already not trying to be a model inmate. You're trying to leave with skills to become successful outside. And that attracted a lot of unwanted attention from staff and bureaucrats who transferred you, threatened you, put you in segregated housing. It seems like there's a
flip side of that.
Yeah.
There's a flip side of that, because it also gave me enormous credibility and strength. And that's very powerful right now. And those people that locked me in the shoe, in fact, my biggest advocate or champion in the prison system right now is a regional director of the Bureau of Prisons. He's over 30,000 people. And when I was in Lompoc, you read the book or you listened to the book. So when I was in Lompoc, a federal prison, and I was in the shoe, you may remember some captain locking me in the hole for publishing and so on. And it was this guy, his name is, I'm just going to use his name as Andy. That's his first name. I won't use his last name. And Andy came to me as the captain, and he said, you can't do this from my prison, And I said, well, I can. I have it in my file that I can. And he said, okay, you know what to do. And then I litigate my way and I prevail. And when I prevail, I'm still in the hole. And he comes to me and said, well, I still don't want you in my prison. I don't want a writer in my prison. I'm going to ship you. I said, that's fine. He ships me, and I continue the path. And then I get out. And when I get out, I'm building my career, and I'm speaking. I'm a keynote at like 1,000 people event. It's a judicial conference, and there's 1,000 people in the audience. And I'm the keynote, and you can't see that audience when they're that big. And he comes up to me after, and there's judges, prison authorities, the governors in the audience in Sacramento. And he comes up to me afterwards and he shakes my hand and said, do you remember me? I said, of course I remember. You locked me in the hole at Lompoc for basically doing the same thing.
For nothing. Yeah, for doing this exact thing that you just paid me to do. Pal.
And he just says, he laughed. He said, I'm really happy to see what you're doing with your life. And I'd love to come out. I'm now a warden in the penitentiary. I'd love for you to come out and make a prison. I said, I could come out and do that, but that has a lifespan of about a couple of hours. Let's make an impact. Let's change people and let me create something that I can leave there and give people a pathway. And he said, great. And that started my whole kind of career that now I reach, more than 200,000 people a day in prisons across the country that don't have access to the internet, but they have access to, my books, my courses, my DVDs and things of that sort. And it's really fulfilling. So yeah, I went through the challenges. That gives me credibility. When I go into a prison and they'll see me, and I go in with a suit and tie, they'll look at me and they'll think that, I look like a probation officer or something, right? And then they hear I was in prison. That fool was never in prison. And I'll say, you think you're giving me an insult because I don't look hard enough, but here's a little secret. That was the plan, to come out and be successful. And it's what launched my career in business and in real estate and in everything else because of these skills I learned in prison. And that's what I want to share with people inside. So all of those pain points of getting transferred and going to the hole and having to overcome and bring mentors in my life, all that did is give me enormous currency and credibility and getting people to believe in themselves. And that's really what all of my work is about. The story is just a catalyst for what I hope the people see they can do.
It is easy to see in the book. I'm glad to hear that, because it is sort of easy to see in the book how a lot of the prison guards and administrators, some of them are drunk on power and control. It doesn't surprise me, but some of them really seem like they live to torment the people under their care. And I kind of get it. I mean, many prisoners are probably horrible people that have spent their lives victimizing and hurting and even killing other innocent people. but it just doesn't seem necessary to antagonize people while they're already locked in a cage. And I feel like maybe I'm naive or soft for thinking that. I don't know. I'm curious what you think.
Well, my response would be there were some, but there were also many who helped me, without a doubt. I mean, and I wrote about those people, like the guy who gave me the book on philosophy. You know, that was a turning point in my life. And it started at the right time, right at the start of my journey. And I learned, wow, if I change the way that I think, I'm going to get through this. And then there was Miss Stevens, who gave me the job in a factory, and by me having that job, she saved my life. I mean, I'm in a very dangerous, volatile, violent penitentiary. And she gave me a sanctuary. Or Dr. Ellis, who allowed me to go to the Suicide Watch program and study, and that allowed me to accelerate my studies. Or Warden Luther, who opened all those opportunities at McKean and allowed me to teach that group at Princeton. Or the wardens who signed off on me getting transferred to lower security numerous times. There were many staff members that helped me. Now, does that mean there were not some that tried to make things a little bit more difficult? No. But I always view this as, I have to live in the world as it exists, not as I want it to be. And I have to, as Gandhi says, I have to be the change I want to see. If I didn't like the prison system, I have to be it change. I have to make it change. And that's become my ministry, so to speak, of really trying to change the system in a way that empowers other people to reach their highest potential. Not by making excuses. I don't care how many guards are nice or not nice. I care about what can I do in here. And I was really lucky to have had that help.
Story reminds me in a way of, and I think you mentioned this in the book, or at least we talked about on the phone, Dave's Killer Bread. Have you ever?
Yeah, what an awesome story that is.
Yeah. Can we go over that just very briefly? I got a couple loaves of that in the kitchen right now. It's really good bread.
My favorite bread.
Yeah.
We got to get him to sponsor the show here,
exactly.
The Jordan Harbinger show, because let me tell you, I can give you a great story on how he inspired me and how I use his course as a model of excellence and what can happen for people. So, yeah, I'm familiar with his story. If you got questions for me on, I'm happy to respond.
Yeah, I'm just curious because I think people maybe have seen this in the grocery aisle. They were going to sponsor the show. I think it's still in the works. It's still sort of grinding away. But this bread was, well, you tell me just the brief story.
So here's what I know about Dave, right? And I know about him through The Last Mile, Chris Redlitz at San Quentin and their program. But Dave is a guy that had a serious problem with drugs and criminal behavior as a young man. He came from a family of bakers, and I think his father, I don't remember if his father was an immigrant, but he had a little small bakery in a small town in Oregon, and his brother was kind of a successful executive that had kind of been disturbed by his brother's criminal behavior. I think it was Dave was the older brother, and the younger brother went in the father's path, and Dave went in the bad path and was in prison for a long time, and he became a baker, and a good baker. And that's how that was his path in the prison, was to become a baker. People, they are bakers in prison. He got out, his family had the bread business, and Dave wanted to try something different, and I think it was healthy was his goal. He was a fitness fanatic. If you see him, he looks like a bodybuilder, and wanted to build this machine, and he did, and they started selling it at as I recall, like a little swap meet or something like the local fair in Oregon, and it was a big hit, and started growing it, got some venture capital. I believe he built it into like a $50 million venture, and then I think private equity bought him out. But a great story of resilience and inspiring, and I take that to people in prison every day.
Yeah, and it's some good-ass bread. Dave's Killer Bread. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Great bread.
Yeah,
it's
really,
it is
really
great
good.
bread. It's what we eat.
I like that 9 grain. That's my
I don't know what
it
is, but I love it. With peanut butter, it's awesome.
That's funny. I do the same thing. Throw some peanut butter on there, toast it up. You got a ton of willpower, a ton of focus. You're running marathons in prison, in the yard there. But I am curious, how do you make peace with events happening outside prison when you're locked up inside, right? Friends and family are dying when you're not there. And I know your grandfather died while you were in. Your father got Alzheimer's and went to a home. He couldn't talk with you or visit you. And it sounds so horrible because, of course, those people want to see you and you want to see them. But you just simply run out of time and there's nothing that you can do about it. And maybe the worst part is that you run out of time, and so do they. Only the situation, it wasn't their choice. You know, it was yours.
Yeah, I think I bore a lot of responsibility for that, and it still weighs on me somewhat that I caused pain, because, you know, it's not only me serving time. My family wanted me home, and life does go on. Sisters get married, they have children. My father not only contracted Alzheimer's, or rather got Alzheimer's, but also died. And my grandfather died, and Bruce died, and Norval died, and all these people who had influence on me. And it's one of the things that my wife says is that prison, you know, kind of made me less emotional in a sense, where I'm really stoic and really obsessed with what I have to do. And I had to train myself in there to shut that out. And I learned it's one of the after effects of my life, and why I'm so grateful to have Carol, because everything revolves really around what we're building and what we're doing. And I strive to, I've got a great relationships with my family that is alive. I was grateful that my mom got to see me emerge and become successful. But she also passed away. It's just part of the journey. You know, for me, we're on a journey, and this is a part of my journey, and work is a big part of my journey. But I lost a lot, you know, but I lost a lot because of the choices I made, and I gained a lot.
Well, you've accomplished more inside prison than most people accomplish outside prison, and you're making me feel a little bit bad about myself here, Santos. So I got to step up my game, man. I'm really honored to know you, and I'm so thankful you spent this time with me today.
I'm super grateful to have spent time with you. I would encourage you and your audience to realize that, you know, mass incarceration really is a great social injustice. It afflicts the people of color and the poor more than anyone else. And we as a society that can do better, should do better. And anybody that wants to get involved in that, I would encourage them to visit us at Prison Professors, and particularly people that are entrepreneurs and digitally savvy. Help us get those people ready for prime time.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe.